Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a moment of history that, perhaps more than any other, really defined the political map of modern Asia. We're talking about the transfer of power in 1947.
Right. And when you think about the partition of India, you often hear the incredibly tragic stories, mass migration, riots, the human cost.
Exactly. Those stories are vital, absolutely. But they sometimes overshadow something just as crucial, which is the meticulous, almost unbelievable legal and constitutional struggle happening underneath it all.
That's precisely the angle we need to explore today, based on our sources.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, really, to see how this deep political aspiration, often tangled up with violence and ideology, was ultimately channeled into lawful, internationally recognized sovereignty.
So we're focusing on that transformation.
Yes, drawing particularly on scholarly work, like the constitutional analysis by Zaheer Ahmad Meer. He really digs into Jinnah's legal thinking and the immense constitutional effort involved.
Right. So our mission today, for you listening, is to kind of peel back those layers of chaos, the tragedy, to see the legal blueprint beneath. We're looking at how constitutional method, in a way, won out over violent revolt. That's a powerful idea.
It is, and it seems contradictory, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
How did this situation, defined by political breakdown, mass chaos, how did that translate almost overnight, it seems, into a formal legal division signed off by the British Parliament?
That's the central puzzle, isn't it? The key is understanding that while the chaos created the urgency, the actual mechanism had to be strictly legal. It needed to be, to give the new states legitimacy on the world stage.
Okay.
So we really need to track that accelerated timeline of 1947. How the time frame for British withdrawal just shrank dramatically from over a year down to less than 5 months.
Okay, let's set that scene then. Section 1, the accelerated clock of history, March to June 1947. So moving back just a little, late 46, early 47, the sources make it clear that by then, any constitutional machinery designed to keep India united had basically ground to a halt.
Completely stalled, yeah.
We talk about the failure of the cabinet mission, those earlier attempts to create some kind of unified federal structure.
The cabinet mission's failure is really the starting pistol for everything that happens in 47. It's important for you to remember what it tried to do.
Okay.
It proposed this complex three-tier structure, remember. Provinces grouped into A, B, and C sections for regional stuff, with a pretty weak center just handling defense, foreign affairs, communications.
It was a last-ditch attempt at compromise, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to satisfy both the Muslim League's push for autonomy and Congress's insistence on unity.
Exactly. But the core disagreement, the thing that sunk it, was that compulsory grouping clause.
Ah.
The Muslim League initially accepted the plan, seeing those Muslim majority groupings, B and C, as maybe a stepping stone to Pakistan. But Congress insisted that provinces should be able to opt out of the groups right away.
Which, for the League, defeated the whole point of the grouping.
Precisely. And when the British couldn't, or wouldn't, provide a clear legal interpretation that satisfied both sides, the whole intricate mechanism just seized up, locked solid.
So that was it for negotiated unity. The sources describe it as the final collapse of those earlier constitutional talks.
And that failure wasn't just political disagreement. It signaled real disintegration, the terrible riots breaking out, the interim government struggling to function. It wasn't just background noise.
No.
It convinced the British that time had genuinely run out for a negotiated, unified solution. The path they'd tried to lay was blocked, and things were getting incredibly dangerous on the ground.
Which is when they felt they had to impose a deadline, right, to try and regain some control.
Correct. February 1947, Prime Minister Attlee makes the big announcement. Britain intends to quit India, setting the final withdrawal date no later than June 1948.
June 1948, that was meant to give them, about 15 months for an orderly, managed withdrawal, a sort of dignified exit.
That was the intention. A controlled handover. But, as the sources stress, the reality on the ground just completely overtook that plan almost immediately.
So that initial time frame became obsolete very quickly.
Incredibly quickly. The sources really highlight this. Within weeks of Attlee's announcement, the chaos just exploded. You had horrific communal violence tearing through Punjab. Bengal was on edge. It became brutally clear that 15 months was a fantasy.
Legal talks were being drowned out by violence.
Absolutely. And this rapid acceleration of the crisis forced a major tactical shift in British policy. They realized waiting until June 48 wasn't just risky. It could lead to a total collapse of administration, maybe even civil war, and they'd still be technically in charge, still responsible.
So the timeline wasn't really compressed by clever negotiation. It was compressed by the sheer force of the crisis itself.
Exactly. The British objective shifted. It wasn't about negotiating the perfect settlement anymore. It was about executing a formal, legal exit as fast as possible before complete anarchy took over.
And that need for speed, that urgency, that's what led to the arrival of Lord Mountbatten as the last viceroy.
Precisely. He was sent in specifically because of this crisis acceleration.
Mountbatten. He's often painted as the man who just rushed everything through. But you mentioned his mandate was unique.
Yes, the sources are quite clear on this. He arrived with extraordinary discretion. That's the key phrase.
What did that mean in practice?
It meant he wasn't just there to follow orders from London on a preset plan. He had the authority, the actual power, to fundamentally change the approach. His instructions were to transfer power in whatever form the Indian people choose.
Whatever form. That's incredibly broad.
It is. It signaled that the previous commitment to unity could be abandoned if necessary. This extraordinary discretion was the legal justification, if you like, for the sudden pivot towards partition. He wasn't locked into delivering unity. He was mandated to deliver power, quickly and legally, under whatever terms proved workable.
So he wasn't just an administrator. He was almost like a constitutional troubleshooter sent in with a blank check, legally speaking.
In a sense, yes. His job was to assess the stark reality of the political division, which was undeniable by then, and translate that reality into a concrete legislative act. And given the spiraling violence, that had to happen in months, definitely not years.
His arrival marked the end of the long, drawn-out negotiation phase and the start of a very rapid, very decisive execution phase.
That's a good way to put it. The focus shifted entirely to finding the quickest, legally sound way out.
Okay, so Section 2, the shift from federation to division. This brings us squarely to the Mountbatten Plan.
Right. Now, when Mountbatten arrived in March 47, he didn't just immediately say, okay, partition it is.
Yes, he still explored other options.
He did, initially.
Yeah.
His team looked at those last-ditch ideas to maybe salvage some form of unity, or at least a semi-unified structure.
Like what? What was still on the table, even briefly?
Well, things like a revised, maybe even looser federation than the cabinet missions idea. Or perhaps a confederation where regions had huge autonomy but maybe shared a defense budget or something. Even a sort of dual dominion idea was floated.
Dual dominion, like Canada and Australia sort of thing, but maybe sharing more?
Potentially. Perhaps sharing a head of state temporarily or having joint treaty obligations. But these ideas faded very fast.
Why?
Because they couldn't bridge that fundamental ideological gap, the stalemate, between the main parties.
Let's define that stalemate clearly, because it really shows why any kind of constitutional unity was, by this point, probably impossible. The two major parties, Congress and the Muslim League, had positions that were just non-negotiable, weren't they?
Completely irreconcilable when it came to the center. Jinnah's position for the Muslim League was absolutely rooted in legal principle. He consistently demanded a sovereign Pakistan with full parity in international law.
Full parity. That's not just about politics, is it? That's a very specific legal status.
Exactly. It wasn't just a slogan. It meant the new state, Pakistan, had to possess every single attribute of sovereignty that India would have. The right to join the UN independently, the right to make its own treaties, conduct its own foreign policy, even wage war with absolutely no legal subordination to India or any shared body.
So any plan involving a confederation or a shared center, even a weak one, would automatically violate that principle of absolute legal equality.
Precisely. For Jinnah, according to the sources like Meer's analysis, the legitimacy of Pakistan was tied directly to its status as a sovereign equal in the eyes of international law. He wasn't asking for just a self-governing region within India. He was demanding an entirely separate, equal legal entity.
And on the other side, Congress.
Congress, having fought for decades for a single independent Indian state, was deeply committed to maintaining a strong center. They strongly resisted any plan that would lead to what they saw as the fragmentation of India, especially the creation of a totally separate, sovereign Pakistan.
So you had one side demanding absolute separation and legal equality, and the other demanding fundamental unity. There was just no middle ground left on that core issue of sovereignty.
None. And that absolute deadlock, that failure to bridge the sovereignty gap, is what directly forced the big turning point. The Mountbatten Plan, announced on the 3rd of June, 1947.
June 3rd. This is the date, then, where the dream of a united independent India officially died. legally speaking.
It's the formal declaration, yes. The British government officially stating that unity was now unachievable. The June 3rd Plan, as it's often called, formally abandoned any lingering hope for a federal solution.
And it laid out the actual mechanics for creating two separate states.
Yes, it established the machinery for two independent dominions, India and Pakistan.
Let's get into the specifics of that plan, because this really set the legal groundwork for the Act of Parliament that followed just weeks later. What were the key provisions? How did it legalize the process of division?
Okay, a few key things. First, it formally offered dominion status to two successor states, India and Pakistan, both to receive full independence much sooner than June 1948. August 15th was the date set.
So it brought the date forward dramatically.
Hugely. Second, and this was critical for making it happen, it outlined a mechanism for the provinces themselves, particularly the complex cases of Punjab and Bengal, to decide their own fate regarding partition.
Oh, how did that work?
Essentially, the provincial legislative assemblies were the key. For Punjab and Bengal, the members representing the Muslim-majority districts and the non-Muslim majority districts would meet separately. If either group voted for partition, then the province would be divided.
So it wasn't the whole province voting as one, but district representatives voting in blocks.
Correct. It was a mechanism designed to confirm the division based on existing legislative representation. And crucially, the plan also established the machinery for that division if the vote went that way.
Ah, the boundary commissions.
Yes. The plan mandated the creation of boundary commissions, most famously the ones led by Sir Cyril Ratcliffe, to draw the actual lines partitioning Punjab and Bengal. The principle was meant to be contiguous majority areas, considering other factors. That mechanism was part of the June 3rd announcement itself.
So this plan did something quite profound conceptually, didn't it?
It really did. Our expert source, Meer, points this out. It fundamentally shifted the idea from a transfer of power like Britain, just handing over the keys to one successor, to a division of power. The British were now legally sanctioning the creation of two distinct sovereign entities out of their former territory.
That shift from transfer to division must have had huge implications for the kind of law needed to enact it. Parliament wasn't just letting go, it was actively carving up its own authority.
Absolutely. And that required the formal acceptance of this June 3rd plan by the key players, Jinnah and the Congress leadership.
And Jinnah accepted it, despite his earlier demands for a larger Pakistan, including the whole of Punjab and Bengal.
He did accept it. And the sources capture the sense of reluctant necessity very clearly.
Yes, the quote is powerful. He accepted it not out of triumph, but necessity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he reportedly told his colleague something like, "We have been offered a truncated Pakistan, but I am glad we are getting it."
Truncated Pakistan. Let's unpack that phrase because it's loaded. What did truncated mean in that specific context?
It referred directly to the agreed partition of Punjab and Bengal. Jinnah and the Muslim League had initially laid claim to these provinces in their entirety, based on overall Muslim majorities, albeit with large non-Muslim populations in certain areas.
So accepting truncated meant giving up significant historically important territories, especially in Punjab, with Lahore going to Pakistan but Amritsar to India, and Bengal losing Calcutta.
Yes. It meant sacrificing those large non-Muslim majority districts, and some contested Muslim majority ones too, to secure the fundamental goal: a sovereign, independent state, even if smaller than hoped for. He had to choose between the legal reality of statehood now, under these terms, or potentially getting nothing if deadlock continued.
So the deep dive here, the analysis suggests, is that Jinnah prioritized immediate legal sovereignty over maximum geographical territory. He understood that the only path to a recognized state was through accepting the terms laid down within the existing imperial legal structure.
It was a major compromise, a trade-off. He secured the principle, the legal fact of Pakistan at the cost of territory.
And that acceptance, however reluctant, along with Congress's acceptance, was the green light the British government needed.
It was the absolutely essential political agreement. The June 3rd plan wasn't the final law itself, but it was the political prerequisite. It cleared the path for the British Parliament to act incredibly swiftly.
Okay, Section 3 then. The Indian Independence Act of 1947. This is where law becomes the midwife of freedom, as the source puts it.
A very apt description.
Once that political deal was struck on June 3rd, the legal process in London moved at, well, breathtaking speed. We're talking about a major act of parliament drafted, debated, and passed within weeks.
It's quite extraordinary when you think about it. The sources really emphasize this legislative haste. The Indian Independence Act, IIA, went through all its stages in the British Parliament and received royal assent, became law on the 18th of July, 1947.
July 18th, so less than 7 weeks after the June 3rd plan was announced.
Exactly. It shows an immense political will in London, driven by Mountbatten's reports from India to get the legal framework finalized and the exit confirmed before the situation on the ground deteriorated even further, potentially beyond anyone's control.
This act, the IIA, this is really the heart of the legal story we're telling, isn't it? It wasn't just a symbolic document. It was the actual legal engine driving the creation of two nations.
Absolutely. It performed essentially three monumental legal functions, all achieved through a British statute.
Okay, what were they?
First, quite simply, it legally terminated all British authority in India. It ended the British Raj, full stop. The sovereignty of the British Crown over India ceased to exist from the appointed day.
Right, the end of empire, legally enacted.
Second, and this is the core of the division aspect, it formally divided British India into two new independent dominions, India and Pakistan. It legally established them as separate entities with effect from the 15th of August, 1947.
And the third function? You said three.
The third was absolutely crucial for making independence real and immediate. The act explicitly granted plenary legislative powers to the Constituent Assembly of each new dominion.
Plenary powers. What does that mean exactly?
Plenary means full, complete, unrestricted. It meant that from August 15th, the Constituent Assemblies of India and Pakistan had the supreme power to make any law they wanted for their territory, including, crucially, the power to frame their own new constitutions and the power to repeal or amend any existing British law that applied to them, even the Indian Independence Act itself.
Ah, so that's what severed the legislative umbilical cord to Westminster. That plenary power guaranteed genuine sovereignty because the British Parliament couldn't override their decisions anymore.
Precisely. If the UK Parliament had retained any power to legislate for the Dominions or revoke the Act, it wouldn't have been true independence. The IIA was designed to be, in effect, self-destructing from Britain's perspective after August 15th. Britain gave away its power irrevocably.
And the act itself, was it a huge, complex piece of legislation?
That's another fascinating point the sources stress. Physically, it was incredibly brief, only 20 sections long.
20 sections to end an empire and create two nations.
Seems incredible, isn't it? But its brevity masked its immense legal weight. It carried, as one source puts it, the weight of centuries, because in those 20 sections it effectively repealed or fundamentally modified generations of previous imperial laws concerning India. It was a concise but incredibly potent piece of legal engineering.
But wait, if it only had 20 sections, how did it provide a functioning government for these two massive new countries on day one? You can't run a state with just 20 clauses.
But that's a really crucial practical point for you, the listener, to grasp. The IIA didn't try to create new constitutions from scratch. That wasn't its job. Its job was to transfer sovereignty and empower the new states to write their own constitutions later.
Okay, so how did they govern in the meantime, from August 15th onwards?
The act contained a clever, practical solution. It stipulated that the existing constitutional framework, the Government of India Act of 1935, which had been the basis for administration under the British, would continue to operate as the temporary or interim constitution for both India and Pakistan.
So they used the old imperial structure as a stopgap.
Exactly. But, and this is the vital change, the 1935 Act was adapted and modified by the IIA. Crucially, it would now operate under the supreme authority of the new Dominion Constituent Assemblies, not the British Parliament. This allowed the new governments to have functioning ministries, courts, civil services, everything, immediately on August 15th, using a familiar framework, but now under their own sovereign control.
I see. So going back to Jinnah's legal strategy, he effectively used this imperial law, the 1935 Act, as a kind of constitutional bridge.
That's exactly how the analysis frames it. Jinnah viewed the Indian Independence Act, which kept the adapted 1935 Act in place temporarily, as the final constitutional bridge. It linked the period of colonial rule to the new era of sovereign Pakistan.
And this really underscores the central thesis, doesn't it? That the creation of Pakistan, despite the surrounding chaos, was achieved through a legal statutory process. It wasn't a revolution that overthrew the law. It was a process that worked within the existing, albeit imperial, legal system.
Absolutely. Jinnah's success from this legal perspective stems from his mastery of that constitutional language and his respect for the statutory mechanisms of the ruling power. He essentially used the rulebook to dismantle the empire's authority over the territory he sought for Pakistan.
But let me push back on that slightly. If the chaos, the violence, the burning of Punjab was the catalyst that forced the British hand and compressed the timeline, doesn't that diminish the sort of moral purity of this constitutional victory? How did the sources square the preceding violence with the idea that the method was purely legal?
That's a fair challenge. The way the sources, particularly Meer's analysis, seem to reconcile this is by carefully distinguishing between the cause and the method. The chaos was undeniably the cause, the tragic, inescapable reality that forced the political decision to divide and accelerate the process.
Okay.
But the method chosen to formalize that division, once the political decision was made on June 3rd, was strictly constitutional and statutory, culminating in the IIA passed by the sovereign legislature of the ruling power.
So the argument is, even though it was born out of a desperate situation, the birth itself was legitimate because it followed established legal procedures.
Precisely. The fact that the final act was a statute passed by Parliament, rather than, say, a unilateral declaration of independence backed by force, is what conferred immediate and largely unquestioned legal legitimacy on Pakistan and India from day one. It was a legal victory achieved through constitutional means, even if the context was tragic necessity.
And that immediate legal grounding, that legitimacy conferred by an act of the British Parliament, was incredibly important internationally.
Hugely important, especially in the post-World War II world. With the formation of the UN and the emphasis on international law, it meant Pakistan wasn't born as an unrecognized pariah state or a revolutionary entity fighting for recognition.
Right.
It was born as a legal successor state, a dominion within the Commonwealth initially, which gave it immediate standing. It could join international organizations, sign treaties, engage in diplomacy right away, using the established legal frameworks. That was a significant strategic advantage in those chaotic early days.
Okay, that makes sense. So the law wasn't just symbolic. It provided the essential international recognition and the initial domestic framework.
Exactly. It was the indispensable foundation.
All right, let's move to the final moments then. Section 4, midnight, morning, and the lesson of law and leadership.
The actual transfer.
The physical moment of transfer. It's often depicted quite romantically, isn't it? But even the timing highlights the separation midnight on August 14th, 15th in Delhi for India, and the formal ceremonies happening slightly earlier during the day on the 14th and into the dawn of the 15th in Karachi for Pakistan.
The different timings were partly logistical and symbolic, yes. But the immediate focus wasn't just on ceremony. It was on the practical and institutional reality. The transfer required the immediate installation of new leadership, people who could wield the authority granted by the Indian Independence Act.
And in Pakistan, that responsibility fell squarely on Jinnah. He was sworn in as the first Governor General.
Yes, the representative of the Crown initially, under the Dominion status granted by the IIA.
And the sources note something interesting about his first major address in that moment, a moment you'd think would be purely about euphoria, about victory after decades of struggle. But his speech wasn't just ceremonial.
No, it's described as more than that. It was framed as constitutional guidance. Jinnah, perhaps more than anyone, understood that the legal battle was won. But the immense task of building a state, especially amidst the horrific violence and mass displacement of partition, had only just begun.
And what was the core message of that guidance?
He famously spoke of achieving Pakistan and the need to move forward with faith, discipline, and selfless devotion.
Faith, discipline, and selfless devotion. That's striking. In that moment of achieving the ultimate goal, why focus on discipline? Why not unity or freedom or triumph? Why that specific word?
It's a fascinating choice. The analysis suggests it reflects his immediate pivot from advocate to leader, from lawyer to lawgiver. He knew the legal structure provided by the IIA, and the adapted 1935 Act was just a framework, perhaps even a fragile one initially.
Right.
The state's survival, its ability to function amidst the chaos of partition, the millions of refugees, the breakdown of order in places depended entirely on the new leadership and the people imposing order, structure, discipline on the situation. Euphoria wouldn't build institutions or resettle refugees.
So discipline was the necessary ingredient to manage the immediate, overwhelming challenges, to actually make the legal victory stick, to build a functioning state on top of those 20 sections of the IIA.
Absolutely. His legal statesmanship didn't end on August 15th. It transformed. He understood that the way Pakistan was achieved through law and constitutional process demanded a responsible, disciplined approach to governance from the very start.
It connects back to the idea of his journey from lawyer to lawgiver. His legacy, viewed through this lens, isn't just about achieving Pakistan, but about his unwavering commitment to constitutional method right through the process, and even in the first moments of its existence.
Yes. The sources argue that the transfer of power wasn't just Britain deciding to leave, it was the direct outcome of Jinnah's specific strategy. His ability to use the existing legal system, respect its processes, and ultimately achieve his goal within its bounds.
It sounds like a very risky strategy, though, using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, so to speak. What if the British had just ignored the constitutional arguments and used force?
That was always a risk, theoretically.
Mm.
But Jinnah's genius, arguably, was in keeping the arguments squarely on the constitutional and legal playing field. Britain, especially post-WWII, presented itself as a nation committed to the rule of law and constitutional processes, even in its empire.
So he held them to their own standards.
In effect, yes. By consistently framing his demands in impeccably legal and constitutional terms, he made it very difficult for the British to simply dismiss them or resort to purely coercive measures without undermining their own claims to legitimacy. He forced the negotiation to stay within the legal arena, where his own strengths as a brilliant constitutional lawyer lay.
Okay, so if we pull it all together, Zaheer Ahmad Meer's final assessment, the ultimate takeaway from this legal perspective.
It comes back to that core point about legitimacy and how it was achieved. The conclusion is powerful. Pakistan was not gifted. It was earned within the bounds of law through the power of constitutional conviction.
Not gifted, earned. Let's linger on earned for a moment. What does that imply?
It implies that Pakistan's existence wasn't just a concession granted by a departing empire. It was the result of a sustained, rigorous, and ultimately successful legal and constitutional campaign waged within the rules set by that empire. It required adhering to those structures, navigating their complexities, and using the power of legal argument to extract the desired outcome, a separate sovereign state.
So it required playing by the existing rules, even when they were frustrating or seemed unfair, rather than opting for outright revolution. Legal rigor over revolutionary fervor.
That seems to be the argument, yes.
Mm.
And the payoff for that strategy was immediate international legal recognition and a constitutional foundation, however provisional initially, that allowed the state to function from day one, despite the immense human tragedy unfolding simultaneously.
That adherence to law provided legitimacy from the very start.
Which was invaluable on the global stage, yes.
Okay, let's quickly recap that incredible journey for you, the listener. It's quite a sequence.
It really is.
We saw the clock start ticking incredibly fast in early 1947, March, really, driven by the escalating chaos and the definitive failure of earlier unity plans like the cabinet mission.
Mm-hmm.
That pressure forced the necessary, though painful, political compromise, the Mountbatten Plan of June 3rd, which formally accepted division and abandoned the Federation dream.
Right, the point of no return politically.
And then, the crucial final step, the remarkably swift legislative action. The Indian Independence Act, passed on July 18th, legally terminated British rule, formally created the two sovereign dominions of India and Pakistan effective August 15th, and critically gave them the plenary power to govern themselves and write their own constitutions, using the adapted 1935 Act as that vital interim framework.
The entire chain of events, from this perspective, hinges on that commitment to legal method and constitutional process. And for you listening today, understanding this process remains deeply relevant. It shows how that initial legal foundation, the birth certificate of a nation formed through such a transfer, can fundamentally shape its stability, its identity, and its relationship with the rule of law from the outset.
The way a nation begins matters profoundly. Which brings us to a final thought, something to mull over, drawing directly from Jinnah's immediate reaction that you highlighted. His immediate emphasis, right at the moment of freedom, on discipline and selfless devotion. What does it really signify when a new nation, born in such extreme circumstances, both euphoria and tragedy, is immediately called to prioritize responsibility and discipline, rather than just celebration or perhaps even settling scores?
That's a deep question. It implies, I think, an immediate and perhaps heavy burden placed upon the new state and its citizens. That disciplined legal birth wasn't an easy birth. It came with immense human cost and required navigating complex rules.
Right.
So perhaps that call for discipline was an acknowledgement that the struggle hadn't ended, it had just transformed. The focus had to pivot instantly from the fight for the state to the fight to build and sustain the state. Managing the refugee crisis, setting up institutions from scratch, maintaining order, all required immense discipline, not just euphoria.
So that disciplined legal pathway to creation imposed its own unique set of responsibilities and challenges from the very first day. A different kind of challenge than if it had been born purely from violent revolution, perhaps.
Potentially, yes. A challenge rooted in upholding the very legal and constitutional principles that were used to achieve independence in the first place, even under the most immense pressure. That responsibility, inherent in the legal nature of Pakistan's birth, is the enduring challenge that shaped its immediate post-partition future.
And that immense challenge, turning the legal victory into a functioning, stable reality on the ground, dealing with refugees, building institutions, and that's exactly where we need to go next time, looking at how they tackled building a new state amidst the chaos.
Indeed. The story moves from the legal creation to the practical construction. We look forward to exploring that next critical chapter with you.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the legal architecture of 1947. We'll see you next time.